because I think one thing that I learned when I was really young is that you learn something from every game, right? Whether it's how you jump or how you interact with other players or even just what the levels are, right? You're always
Mm.
learning in a game. And for some reason, but for some reason, school has always been a place where you are not allowed to have games.
Mm.
So it's been my personal passion and professional career really to kind of mix those two things together. And one of the things that we're really excited about coming up is that we're going to be releasing our new tabletop RPG, Teatime Adventures. Um, and I don't know, there's like so many millions of things that I can say about it. But the thing that I think we usually start with is like it's 5e compatible. You can play
Mm.
if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you more or less already know how to play. It's super wholesome. We kind of call it, it's a little bit similar to like queer Hallmark. So like, like all the representation that you sometimes miss on some of the Christmas movies and things like that they show
Mm.
on certain channels. Um, and every adventure comes with a tea pairing. So yeah, there's that.
That's my favorite part. Because I mean, first of all, who doesn't love tea? Second of all, just the cozy, like the art of the Kickstarter, the art that I can't remember the artist's name. What's the artist's name again?
Quill Colat, yep,
Oh,
out here in Cleveland
yeah.
with us.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Just amazing.
yeah, we actually, I mean, a number of us read cozy mysteries, which is kind of like a subgenre in fiction. If you know, heck, I got one right here,
Mm.
Mulch Ado About Murder, and it's just like got a picture of a cat on the front, right? It's um, like sometimes you just don't want to go into the darkest dungeon and fight the vile demon king with the dragon. Like sometimes you do, and that's great. And sometimes you just want a week off so you could just chill a little bit. So that's where a lot of this came from because we found that we needed those kind of breaks in our gameplay. And then yeah, the tea, we're all crazy tea drinkers and it made sense to kind of pair the experiences with the tea experience. And so we were really lucky. We haven't announced it yet, but we're really lucky that we're going to be able to be shipping tea along with the adventures through the Kickstarter. So you can actually get custom blends designed for each adventure to share with your players at the table.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's
pretty cool.
amazing. So yes, because and that kind of what you're saying goes right in line with a lot of the conversations that are happening in the video game space too, with like, what is a gamer? Are cozy games, like Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing? What if one of my favorite TikToks is like, what if we treated cozy games like we treat every other game? Like, oh, but do you play Animal Crossing? Like, So what really drove you to kind of step in the TTRPG space? What was the thing that you were like, I'm home here, I feel good here? How did that start?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a weird trip, right? So like when I was a kid, I think the first time I played a tabletop role-playing game was around 12, 13. And I had a ton of fun, right? But it became a thing that, like a lot of aspects of my identity, it was just something that I had to hide because it
Mm.
just wasn't super well accepted. Um, so it just became a thing that I never talked about unless I was with like my gamer friends. And I think over time, my career has like allowed me more and more leeway to just be like, no, like I'm here and I want to talk about tabletop role playing games because it's been such an important experience for me. Like, for example, one thing that I couldn't say when I was giving an interview to become a teacher, so I was a high school teacher, right? They're like, okay, so what prepared you for becoming a high school teacher? And of course, I had to give all the answers like, oh, well, I read this education book and I worked with kids and stuff. But what I really wanted to say was like, tabletop role playing games, right? Because when you're a dungeon master, you're sitting there planning out an experience. You have to keep every player's preferences in mind. Some people are there for adventure, some for loot, some for leveling, some for role playing, and some just there to hang out, right? So like
Mm.
you have to differentiate your experiences for each of them. You have to keep it in the zone of proximal design, right? Zone of proximal design, right? So
Mm.
like not too hard, not too easy. You have to lead them along. That you give them homework, but if you give them too much homework, they phase out, right? Like how do you keep them engaged over 3, 4, 5 hours? It's teaching. That's what it
Yeah.
is, right? But usually principals don't respond to that too well. You're like, how do you prepare to become a teacher? I was a dungeon master.
Right.
But
And
maybe we
my
can
players
normalize it.
stayed
I don't know.
engaged.
Yeah, right? No, but it's a huge skill. Like
Mm,
it's taken me decades to get over, and like, and I mean I use it all the time in the classroom, right? I'd be like, okay, well these kids in my classroom right now, they're puzzle people, right? So I just need to make things a lot more like puzzles. And these kids over here, they're role playing people. So I'd set up like little mock role playing games, right? Where they'd have to negotiate with each other. I taught computer science, by the way. So they're like, what's going on, right? But we sat down and we talked about like the DMCA, right? Like Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which they need to know as part of being like involved in computer science. And so they had like a little mock trial where some of them were for it, some of them were against it, and they kind of negotiated based on that. Yeah,
that's
there's
awesome.
so much to learn from tabletop role playing games. It was inevitable that I would do something about it. It's just finally I feel like I have the team with me. Like our team is so amazing, and now it's the right time. People I think are listening a little bit more, and I don't see it on the market right now. Like there are a lot of indie devs doing a lot of great stuff, and there needs to be more. There needs to be more TTRPG, right? Like
Yeah,
tabletop RPG stuff out there. Like
absolutely.
it should be a movement.
Yes, it definitely should. When I was younger, my mom owned her own loose leaf tea shop, so I spent a lot of time
I didn't know that.
learning about all. We had big shelves of loose tea, so like rooibos tea, oolong tea, green tea, jasmine tea. They had these ones that were like these little balls, and then you would put them in there, and then they would like flower up, and then you could use
Yeah,
them like 3 or
yeah.
4 times, right? So when I heard that y'all are doing like a tea pairing with like basically tabletop, I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to get
You should be our tea consultant. Come on.
it's been a while. I'm out of practice.
Okay.
But yeah. So education, has role playing ever helped you in any other aspects of your professional life besides just teaching?
Like everything.
Mm,
So yeah, I'm a teacher. I'm also a lawyer. So I went to law school and all that. And everybody's so stuffy in law school. They're like, they've
mm.
got ties and they're doing this and they're like, I'm here to save America and all that sort of stuff. And then you're like, you realize you're just playing a role-playing game, right? Like you go up there, the judge is the dungeon master, you are the players, you're convincing people. Like it's the same. Like I played Phoenix Wright. I know how to do these sorts of things. But
Brings a whole new
again, it's
spin to Law
frowned
and
upon.
Order.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're just, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's frowned upon when you get out of law school after 3 years and you go interview with like, I worked at the Attorney General's office, right? And it's frowned upon to say in your interview, well, I'm prepared to defend the state because I've been a dungeon master. Like again, it just doesn't sound right. So, um, but no, there's so much about that, about being able to take on somebody else's role, about being able to tap into empathy, to changing your messaging, right? The constant tone switching that you
Mm,
need to go through as a DM or a GM, and just absorbing details, right? So like my personal role playing group is really excited because we're about to play Lords of Gossamer and Shadow, which is like this diceless role
mm.
playing game. I know that's like anathema to a lot of people, but there's no dice in it. I
What?
know. Protect your dice. It's okay. It's okay. We're not coming for them. But but I just spent the last week like reading like 200 pages about it, right? And then absorbing all of the rules and systems and stuff like that. And now I will go and basically give a presentation about it as the GM to teach all of the other players. And then I will be a teacher where I guide them through and like create scaffolded experiences so that they play in the right thing. It's all the same. If there's anybody listening to this who's like, I love being a GM or a DM and I don't know what to do with my life because I'm not good at anything. Like you are literally being a teacher right now. So please consider that as
Right. My we play a game every Saturday. We're doing a homebrew, and the person that's running the homebrew for us is actually a teacher. So it's really funny that that was like their career for a long time. So like yeah, it's all kind of connects. So for
yeah.
those of us in the audience that aren't familiar with tabletop gaming, because I know that in the gaming space, when we think gaming, we think esports, we think video games, we think, and one of the things that Wiggy is really trying to do is to bring TTRPG into the space, because we are gamers, and it is important, and we do have the skills. So what are some of the main differences that you find between TTRPGs and video gaming? Like, what are some of the skills that you might not get in a video game that you would definitely get in a TTRPG?
Yeah. So let's talk about the ways that they're similar first.
Sure.
I'll mention that first, right? When you're playing a video game, um, you are communicating with a machine, right? So like the machine creates all of the world around you. That machine might be an Xbox or might be your PC or whatever you end up using. And that is like all the other characters, that is the setting, that is all the stuff, right? And then you just bring yourself to it. And you like insert yourself into it. But the whole purpose of like programmers, so actually before I say that, so like in a tabletop role playing game, it's actually very similar, right? Like the GM, the game master, or the DM, dungeon master, copyright Wizards of the Coast.
Right.
Uh, the GM is the one who creates everything, right? Like, so they're like the Xbox. They create the NPCs, they create the adventure. They're the Xbox and the game developer, I guess. And they create all of the worlds around you and say how everything plays out and the mechanics. And they're the ones who model physics for you on the fly. You're welcome, and all that other sorts of stuff, right? And as a PC or a player character, you just bring yourself to it. So that's the way that they're the same. But then when you think about it, what's the difference? One's a machine and one's a human. And you can see that one of those two things, it's going to have a lot more variability in it and a lot more ability to adapt to the people that are playing. So in a game, what I always hated about digital games is that it strapped me into this little straitjacket, right? So like first person shooters. I'm not a big FPS person, but like I learned to code because of Doom, like the original video game series, right? Like, so my parents flipped out about it. They're like, why are you doing all this Satan stuff? And I'm like, I don't know, I like it, right? Leave me alone, mom. I'm cool.
I like it.
Yeah. And but honestly, I didn't like I didn't like killing. Like, and that's what so many digital games ask you to do. They just ask you to kill again and again and again and again.
Right.
So one of the first things that I did, and actually the reason why I got into computer science, this is my undergraduate, right? And like becoming a software developer. The reason why I got into that was because of Doom. I went in and I hacked it, right? Like, so I started decompiling the code from it, and I started inserting my own monsters and started inserting my own weapons and like started making my own levels and stuff, so it could be a little bit more peaceful in hell. And like that's like you can see the lion in my career here. So like that's what was so much fun for me, and it took a lot of work to do that, right? But when you're with a human being and you're like, hey, I want to play a game where I don't kill somebody, like the human can be like, all right, sure, right? Like you don't even need to compile that. You just go with it. So the ability to, in an education lingo, we'd say differentiate, right? Like the ability to craft personalized experiences for individuals to guide them through a meaningful journey and to have a one-to-one personal contact and to develop your social skills, your socio-emotional skills, your negotiation skills, and your people reading skills, and all that. You just ain't gonna get it when you're talking to an Xbox compared to when you're talking to a person. So
yeah, absolutely.
long answer.
No, it's fine. I love long answers. Also, too, I think that there's a little bit more accessibility in the TTRPG space because of that, because you can cater that game to certain people. So when I run Icewind Dale is supposed to be a horror kind of space, but one of my friends that we run with does not like that stuff. It doesn't, so we back up the gore and we just don't throw that in there. We like make it very vague. And I think that customizability so that people can still access the same information or the same game, right? Do you find as a teacher, because I know that there's a lot of video game talk about putting esports in schools and video gaming in schools and things like that, do you think that TTRPGs could possibly, if they aren't already, be a really good segue too into education and things like that? You touched upon it a little bit, but like, let's expand on that a little bit more.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, it is a 1000% valid skill. There are some great resources out there already. I always point people to the Kennedy Center, right? Like in Washington, D.C. They
Yes.
actually released free tabletop role-playing games based on Romeo and Juliet and Lord of the Flies. So you can go download those, and they're designed for kids. They're aligned to English standards. Because if you remember in high school reading Lord of the Flies or reading Romeo and Juliet and how that experience, now imagine there are literally kids in America right now learning that by doing a LARP, live action role play, right? Or by
Wow.
doing a tabletop role playing game. And like that's going to be so much more accessible to so many of them. And it's going to be so much more meaningful and connective and all that sort of stuff. You absolutely can. I will give two caveats with that. One is teacher has to have interest in it, right? And this really goes for teaching across the board. If you don't care about what you're doing in the classroom, you're going to be a bad teacher. Like, sorry, like that shouldn't be news to you, but like if you're just kind of like it's not the kind of job where you can just clock in and clock out. You have to actually care about what's going on. So if you don't care about tabletop role-playing games and somebody forces you to bring them into the classroom, it's not going to go so well.
Right.
And then the other thing is, as a teacher, the number one thing that you need to do is listen to your kids, listen to the students, right? Because they're going to guide you and tell you what's meaningful and relevant to their lives. So if you love tabletop role-playing games and you bring them over into your classroom and everybody's like, I just want to play basketball, right? Like you're going to make a lot more inroads talking to them about basketball and going out and playing with them, getting them moving, stuff like that, than you are like, all right, like who's going to be Juliet, right? So, so I think in pedagogy terms, like we talk a lot about interest-based learning, right? So like the interests of and I'm misusing the term a little bit here, but for simplicity, like the interests of the teacher, the interests of the student, if those are both aligned, everybody's gonna have a really good time, right? And that's when magic is gonna happen in education. So, and tabletop role-playing games can be amazing learning experiences if you're set up for the right situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a collaborative storytelling to a certain point, right? Like there's the GM, but then you have the other players too that are influencing things, and then the other players have to like connect with and react to and and they're building a story kind of together. So after all of this and all this experience as a lawyer, as an educator, as a TTRPG player, what was the catalyst to create Snowbright Studios?
Honestly, I was coming out of the education policy space where we had been doing things like writing laws that guided schools and working with Congress and federal agencies and big publishing companies and talking to the kinds of companies that test and quantify and put kids into a bucket. And coming out of all of that, so my head was spinning, honestly. And it was like, I know that there's something really special about games and education. I know there's something special about learning with games because it's touched my life and I've seen other people, it's touched them so much too, right? Like I know more about the Cold War because I played a board game about it than I ever learned in school, right? There's something there.
Yes.
And so coming out of it, we created like a little research company and we started building up this research base. And we started reaching out to AAA game companies, and we work with AAA game companies sometimes, and we contact them and we're like, hey, you're doing amazing things. We did this little study, and we see that you're probably missing girls because you're doing this and this. But if you change that, you probably get a lot more girls involved, right? Which is important because, this is the pipeline for them to get into STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and stuff like that. And usually the kinds of stuff that we got back from many companies was like, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing. Our dev team's really busy right now. And, our business team isn't sure that's gonna make a whole lot of money. Like, all right. So we were sitting on all this research and we're like, what are we gonna do to make, we've built this research. Like, what are we gonna do to connect with people and to make these experiences special and stuff? And we're like, well, if the game companies aren't gonna make it, then we might as well. So we did, right? So like we went out there and we made our first game, Time Tales, which is launching on Steam in like 2 weeks. So it's slated is coming soon right now. I know. And it's all about teaching girls and gender diverse students coding in a way that's different from other games. A lot of coding games are very like masculine leaning. A lot of them are very efficient. A lot of them read like manuals. And this is like every color of the rainbow, talking cats, traveling through history, stories, I mean, just all kinds of craziness, right? And and like we ran a study on it, and we got feedback from some of the, because we test a lot of our games in schools, right? Like we got a study back, and we had teen boys coming back and saying like, I like the game, but there's too much story, right? And then we had teen girls coming back being like, I need this story in my life, right? And it just goes to show like this thing that we keep saying again and again, like different people like different kinds of games.
Right.
So taking that, like we're out here making different kinds of games. We're an LGBTQ plus studio. We care a lot about the experience of families, and like this game that we're putting out there, Teatime Adventures. It's the kind of game that you can play with your kids. It's the kind of game that you can play with your grandma. It's the kind of game that you're going to learn conflict resolution through, because there's a lot of challenges around that. You're going to learn gardening through it because there's a lot of challenges around that. You'll learn baking skills and tea pairings and
Oh
all
my
that sort of stuff,
God.
right? Like, because why not? Why
Yes.
does everyone who comes out with it, everyone, I don't mean to, like, the indie community is coming out with so many cool things, but like
Right.
the major market pushers, right?
Right.
Major market publishers are coming out with these games, and it's like, crawl through the cave and slaughter the lizard people. And I'm like, I am not crawling through any more of your caves. I'm done with these lizard people. Let me tell a different story. And so that's where it's
Right.
coming from.
I love that because it there are different facets of your brain that will connect to different information pieces, and not everyone learns the same way, and we know this, right? We know this. And so I love that you're
Yeah.
taking that information and actually making something actionable with it in a variety of spaces, in video gaming and in tabletop. So can you tell us any more about Teatime Adventure? Can you tell us more?
I can tell you probably too much about it. Yeah, so like one of the very first things that we did, so it's all built on top of 5e, because that's, as you can see, like for me, this is the same thing as going into like Doom and ripping out the code about like monsters and rocket launches and all that sort of stuff and putting
Mm,
something wholesome in. So like for me, it's the very first thing that we started was like, how do we make 5e without combat? So we just pulled out the whole
right.
combat system. Um, how do we make it interesting still? We added in a whole bunch of different kinds of skills, right? Like so like um, sleight of hand, which is used for stealing things, right?
Mm,
Like just by renaming some of these things, we've been able to subvert the ideas behind them. So sleight of hand is now borrowing, right? Like because it's what you're doing. You're borrowing something from somebody. Maybe you intend to give it back, maybe you don't, maybe you forget, right? But
yeah.
like just by calling, words have a lot of power. By calling it something else, right? Like you can come over
Yeah.
that. So we've heavily edited the system itself. We have a brand new system for alignments, because honestly, the alignment system is kind of junk.
Mm.
Sorry, I don't mean to trigger any haters or anything. Like,
It's
but like,
fine.
um, but like, I mean, what's the difference between lawful neutral and lawful good? And it's like
Right.
kind of a mess.
It's kind of an
So
old system too.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's really outdated. And so we have a new system called the Astra, which align more or less feel very similar to like astrological charts, and
Mm,
talk more about personality and something that somebody does by how they see themselves, right? It's like a self-defining aspect of it. We don't have hit points anymore, because like what it's like people aren't going to be like attacked by the Skeleton King. We have morale points, which represents like your character getting dejected over time, and then you need to go off and take a break and stuff like that.
mm.
But honestly, the whole adventure takes place in this town called Oakenbend, and this Oakenbend, again, it's like queer Hallmark Christmas town. Like this is the best way to
So
describe it. It's got so many
excited.
holidays, so much wholesome stuff. We're writing like dozens of NPCs to go into this place. There are over 30 points of interest in the town. Some of them have maps and all this sort of stuff. It's a fully realized town, and there are multiple adventures that can take place in this town.
Mm.
And then the last thing I'll say, like I said, I literally can talk about this forever. But the last big thing I'll say too is we've rewritten the magic system. So we do have a cantrip system that feels very 5e, right? Like you cast a cantrip and whatever. But we've actually, anything above a cantrip, like simple spell, is actually through shared casting. So you actually create a casting circle, and you all contribute to the spell at the
Oh my
same
gosh.
time. And there is a mechanic in there that will let you succeed or fail based on kind of like the weakest link in your casting circle. And
Mm,
so through the game, you can practice working together and building up relationships in your team engagement, so that you can actually cast stronger spells because you understand each other at the table better, which I think is pretty different from some other
yeah.
games.
That's and there are so many things you can use that for. I'm thinking like of my own kids, like that would be because they're like you said, there's so even when you're looking at TTRPGs that are catered to kids, it's still a lot of violence. We have a society that we're just like violence, 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 and then we wonder why we have problems. Do you know what I mean? Like,
There, I do, and that was been so hard for us to go against because the tropes are so deep, right? But
right,
like, there's no race-based violence in this. There isn't an evil race and an evil this or that. Like,
that's
we have
good.
a series of ancestries that come from different places. They coexist everywhere. There isn't like some, this is only the kingdom for these kinds of people sort of thing. Modeling that's been very hard because there's been so few examples out there for us to draw from.
Mm.
There's representation everywhere. We were joking before that we're going to make an announcement because like Disney keeps making an announcement, our first LGBTQ character, and we were going to make an announcement like our first cisgender heterosexual character whenever we have one, because people are complicated, and
Right,
all these other adventures just have the same people again and again, so
right.
why not? So it's stuffed full of representation from LGBTQ, neurodiversity,
Yes.
disabilities play into it in a big way too. We've got some additional consultants that we're working with on that and stuff. So we're just so excited to have something out there that feels so different from everything else.
I'm very excited too. And how long is this Kickstarter going on for? When's
Yeah,
the
we launch on August 3rd, which
okay.
is an auspicious day because it's also the same day that Avatar: The Last Airbender RPG launches on Kickstarter, which
Oh,
I'm here for that. Like, I'm gonna back
yes,
that. But
yes.
like also you should then come over to ours and be like, oh, Avatar,
And
oh
then
right, there was that other T one.
yeah.
Let me back that one too. So we'll run from August 3rd until for about a month. We'll end on September 4th, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, and then we'll have our and we'll have all of our rewards. So we have some digital only rewards. So like even if you back at $1, you'll be able to get like um a, a one sheet on the world and some of the ancestries and stuff like that.
Mm.
We have a 200-page book that has custom illustrations on every single page. Like, our art team has been going
Oh
nuts.
my
Like,
gosh.
it's just a beautiful work of art, right?
I
Like,
bet.
they keep showing me stuff. I'm like, oh, where did you? This is me. I'm not an artist. So that's like, I'm not, right? And I'm like, where did you get that from Google? That looks amazing. And they're like, no, I sketched that. I'm like, how did you make these things, art team? So it's like every single page, right, has illustrations. There's watercolors in there. There's like all kinds of cool stuff. And then we have like a big box, and the big box has like all the stuff that you can imagine. It's got the GM screen that folds out. It's got player mats. It's got custom little tokens
I
in
bet they're
it.
gorgeous.
It's got the tea pairings. It's got all that kind of stuff too. So it should be a
That's
variety of stuff.
amazing. And what do you, because I mean, we all, I think a lot of us in our generation are creating things that we needed, right? Like you said, you're creating the thing you needed when Doom came out, right? Which, by the way, I think is
Yeah.
amazing because I played modded Doom like all the time. So, what's your big hope for this? Like, how do you want people to take this and go forward? Like, what do you think the inspiration is going to come from this amazing thing that you are all creating?
Yeah, I want people to look at tabletop role-playing games and say, I can have fun without a dungeon and I can have fun without a dragon. Like, that's okay, right?
Yes.
Like, I I just I one story I tell a lot is like I got really I got really dejected when I was a kid because every time I walked into the video game store, every single box that I saw was like an angry white man's face with like beard stubble and like a gun. And like, I mean, it's just insane, right? Like every single one.
Yes.
And like your Game Stops and all that. And like as somebody who, right, so like I'm transgender, right? I'm
Mm.
non-binary identifying, and at the time, especially when I was a teen, I was like, I'm failing at being a man, right? Like that's how I thought of things so often. And games reinforce that so dang much
Yes,
because
they
I'd go in
do.
there and I'd be like, well, if I'm gonna like games, I gotta look like one of these people. So I guess I gotta like guns and beer. And I was like, where's everything else? So I don't know. I hate saying it, but like, kids these days are actually a lot better off because they have so many more options out there. And I hope that this makes other people create more games that, go against whatever you see on the racks at GameStop, Barnes and Noble, or wherever else you're at.
We live in such an amazing time right now that we have the capability and the accessibility to create the things that like the former versions of ourselves needed. And like, so now we get to pass those on to all the new generation, all the new people. And I love it. So where can everybody find you? Because you are awesome. And if they want to connect with you, they want to connect with Snowbright Studios. They obviously the Kickstarter link we'll put when it's out and stuff, and get everybody following that. But where can we connect with you if we need some grace in our lives?
Yeah, well, you can so for the Kickstarter, just search for Teatime Adventures on Kickstarter, right? And there's a pre-launch page, so you can follow so you get updates and all that. And then snowbrightstudio.com is our website. And if you go on Twitter, we're at sbright studio. And then me, I'm Mix Collins, MX_Collins on Twitter. And but if you follow me, you also get random stuff about education policy. So I don't know if you want that.
Which I absolutely love, but I love the discourse on Twitter. But I learned so much from you. So thank you so much, Grace, for being here. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. This has been Cheat Codes, and we will see you next time.